What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Jay Rich, back for another episode of Across the Pod with my main man Tom. We are previewing Game Week 12 and talking about wildcard options. We've been talking about the wildcard, Tom, in Game Week 12 for so long now, and we are finally here. So we're here to walk the people through some of our wildcard options, some things we're looking at, some data, some fixtures, and a lot of things in between. We won't even get into what happened in Game Week 11 because it was another disaster for the team, but our transfer of Garnacho did work out. We talked about Bruno Fernandes, and he finally paid off with 17 points against Leicester. But how are you feeling, my man? And are you ready for Game Week 12 and finally wildcarding this team that we've been desperate to get and make happen for some time now?
Yeah, I'm hyped. I'm excited to talk about stuff today. There's a lot to get through. It feels like a real pivot point in the season in terms of people jumping off bandwagons, going on to other players, people off Håland. I think it's an exciting time it's kind of splitting the community. I'm feeling a little bit left out of my personal team because I've already wasted my wild card, but it's still nice to talk through the options, and it's all relevant for who I'm looking to bring in anyway. So I think a lot to go through: fixtures, who to target, wildcard. I think we need to build our team. So no, super excited, and yeah, we can get into it.
Yeah, we have a lot to discuss, from just a lot of players in general to fixture swings. And I think maybe that's where we start, because I know that you did pull some data and get some things for us. So let's pull that up now and start talking through some of these fixtures.
Yeah, so I think these ones are, it's FPL Junior on Twitter that I saw, and I think it's a really good look at the teams to target from a wildcard perspective. And it's not saying that you need to build your team with just these. I just think these are kind of when it comes down to a decision between two players for you, I think it's a lot easier to pick the one who has the better fixtures, right? And I think the likes of Wolves and Brighton at the top look absolutely fantastic. I'm definitely looking at, I've got 8 Nouri in my team for Wolves, and also, a lot of people looking at Cunha. I think defensively they look a little bit better. I also think Brighton look like they have great fixtures. Ipswich as well. I think if it's a decision for like a 4.0 defender, might swing it in their favour, but I'm trying to avoid Ipswich otherwise. I know a lot of people going Delap, which isn't a bad shout. Arsenal is kind of like, a lot of people are looking to do that now, which I think is quite cool. Bring in those assets, that kind of thing. So is there any other teams on there which kind of taking your fancy when you're like thinking about wildcard?
The only one really is talking about Chelsea attackers, and I know we always talk about Nicholas Jackson because he generates a lot of chances, right? And whether it's Palmer or any of the wingers supporting him and getting him chances, it's just whether or not he's going to convert. And we always talk about Cole Palmer and how he's fixture proof, and we want to have him in the team, and I'm sure we'll talk about him when we're talking about wildcarding. And then the other tough one for me, you see the kid on, Tom, it's Newcastle. You see here, they got 3 away games in the next, it's 3 away games, in the next 6. They look like good fixtures, but they've been so bad away from St. James's Park. Isak, one of the most transferred players in this week, still waiting for the price rise on him. Lewis Hall, another player who's been transferred in a lot because he's been finally playing. You talked about him in our first episode as a budget defender. He dropped in price. We took him out of the team, but now he is playing every game, almost 90 minutes, and now he's even playing for England over international break. So he could be a guy who we do want to bring in, but they look good on paper, but I know this team, and I've been watching them every week, and they just don't seem to deliver for me. But outside of that, there's not really too many big ones. The Ipswich one is tough because while Delap did score, I'm still so hesitant to bring him into the team. But I think you're great to talk about Brighton. I'm sure we'll talk about Pedro versus Welbeck because that is going to be a big discussion in the FPL community over the next 2 weeks. And of course, Wolves. You've been talking about Wolves for ages now, and it's been paying off for a lot of people. 8 Nouri, I don't think it's gone up yet, but should soon. And Cunha went up, I believe, on Monday.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just the badge on the front of that shirt. I know you've got Isak on the back, so it's definitely a player we're going to have to talk about. But yeah, I think the only other thing I think it's worth us talking through now is I've just highlighted a few players from each area. So goalkeepers, defenders, mids, forwards. And I think these are the ones which either I think there's a lot of value in and people are overlooking, as well as saying which of the ones are template. And I think we can talk about the template later on, because going on Twitter and scrolling through, it looks like everyone's wildcard team is very similar. So I think there's a balance to get here of picking the players which you think are going to do well versus picking the players which other people think are going to do well. So it's kind of like go with your gut, but I think there's a lot of good options out there. Goalkeepers wise, I don't think there's much to talk about here. I think if you think about the fixtures we just went through, you've got, the likes of who we talked about have really good fixtures, Chelsea, Brighton, etc. So I think if you want to target the good fixtures, it kind of makes sense for me. And I think the two best options is just Chelsea seem to have a ridiculous run from the next few game weeks. And I think a lot of people are looking at Sanchez as an option. There is a question mark around whether he's fully nailed, but I think he will be. Raya, it feels like we're back in game week 1 talking about having Raya double Arsenal defense. Is like there's just so much value in having Raya over an Arsenal defender, especially after those like 10, 12 pointers you got early on. And you've got to understand that they've played City away, Liverpool away, Chelsea away, just this game a week. So it's kind of like they've got a lot of the tough fixtures out. So even though like the next few is good for them, you've got to think like longer term of the season, their fixtures are actually a lot better than a lot of the other big six. So for me, I think Raya is a good option, especially when the defenders are kind of all getting injured and a bit all over the place. White's kind of out, Calafiori's out, Timber's in and out. I think for me, it's either Gabriel or Raya. Maybe both if you think that they're going to be... I still think they're the best defense in the league. I think it's just a case of when they hit form and timing it right, basically. The other one is obviously Verbruggen, who I think is really good as a Brighton asset. I think there's other Brighton defenders which you could bring in, and we'll probably have a conversation about Welbeck and Joao Pedro in a little bit. But from Brighton's perspective, I really like Verbruggen, and he's probably the one I would lean towards from my perspective if I was on Wildcard. I just think Brighton look really, really good. They're obviously, top 4, I think.
They're top 4 now after this week.
Exactly. They look really good. Defensively, they haven't been fantastic, but like he has the ability to make saves, and it's kind of like, do you want to just? I think he's still 4.5 or maybe 4.6, so I think there's a lot of value in him, and I'd be really happy to get rid of Flecken out my team. Thankfully, I put Fabianski playing this week, and he got 8 or 9 points compared to Flecken, also like another blank. So I'd be looking to offload Flecken. I do think, who I haven't put in here worth mentioning, obviously Fabianski, just a £4.0 million keeper who is playing at the minute. Get him as your backup keeper. Absolutely makes sense. And then you can, for West Ham's good fixtures, he might rotate well with whoever you're looking at.
Yeah, so Verbruggen especially, it's something we talked about early on in the pod. And when you look at this Brighton team now, they're playing much better defensively. I believe in their last 6, they've only conceded 2 goals maximum, which is big, obviously, in FPL when you look at the way that goalkeepers score, and especially for defenders as well. So that's where you look at this team, and they were initially one that we looked at as a team you almost want to target, because while they can score and we like their offensive assets, defensively, it's where they tend to struggle. But yeah, you have to go back pretty far, all the way to the Chelsea game in game week 6 when they allowed 4 goals. But since then, it's been 2 or less in every single game. And that's when you have a team where when they're playing much better, and I think they also made some changes fundamentally within the team to play more defensive instead of doing so much counterattack. And they still play a bit of a high line, but it hasn't hurt them as much. Only allowing 2 to Wolves, 2 to Liverpool, and only 1 to City is a massive win for a team that we viewed as played a lot of 2-3 games, 3-2 games. Raya is interesting because when you look at the data right now on FPL Statistics, is one of the great sites you can use for price changes. He's a player who may actually be heading down in price because people are transferring him out. We'll see if that ultimately comes to fruition. It probably won't, especially as Game Week 12 comes closer, because when you talk about having Arsenal assets, I still am like iffy about Havertz right now. He's kind of the one guy who I'd consider if we want to go double up on the Arsenal attack with Saka. But it seems like the better play as it stands is to have Goalkeeper and Raya and Gabriel as our main defender nailed in the team. We've had Gabriel for a little while now, but it seems like having him and Raya and Saka would be the better move overall. Sanchez is interesting because I'm still not there with Chelsea, but they're playing much better defensively than they have been. And especially watching him specifically, he makes a lot of stupid mistakes. But I'm with you when you talk about the fixtures. I think he can play a little bit better, and they can play a little better defensively. But Sanchez is interesting. I'm definitely with you on Fabianski. Just at 4.0, he's a great option, and I'm dying to get Flecken out of the team. But it will probably be for Raya. I may mess around with Verbruggen a little bit. Sanchez, I don't think I'm quite with you there. But then, any love for Nick Pope? Do you think Nick Pope could be a guy that you'd pay up for a little bit now that Newcastle's playing a little bit better, or are you still trying to stay away from Pope? Because he does get a lot of saves, surprisingly.
I do think. Yeah, Pope makes a lot of saves. He's a really good shot stopper. His distribution is awful, but you don't get points for distribution, thankfully. I do think Pope is a good option. I just think the option of having Raya and Lewis Hall is better, for instance, than having Pope and Gabriel, because Pope and Gabriel's like 11 million, 12 million, whereas you can have Raya and Hall for like 9 million. So it's like, is there much value in the other two versus those? Not really. So that's kind of like, the way I'm looking at it, I think Raya's better value than Gabriel, just because of you save money and you can invest it elsewhere in the team. But for me personally, I think Lewis Hall's a better option than Nick Pope, even though historically in FPL, Nick Pope's been a really good asset. And you can see how Newcastle struggle when he's not in net. So I think he is a really big part of their team and how they set up. And I think you'll get bonus points. I think you'll make saves.
Yeah.
I just think if you've got Lewis Hall at 4.3 million, that's kind of like, he's got really good creativity, like up there in the top 5 defenders creativity wise. You still have the option for the Newcastle clean sheet through him. So that's kind of brings us on nicely to the defenders who Lewis Hall does actually sit in there for me. So he's obviously the first one I wrote there. 8 Nouri, we banged on about him for weeks. We don't have to spend too long. I love Wolves' fixtures. I love how he basically plays left wing. He scores, he assists. I think he'll be a feature and a staple in most people's teams, and I'd be surprised if he wasn't in there. I put Van Heck, but that could also be Lewis Dunk, who's coming back from injury. I've got him in my team. Obviously, if you don't go for Fugan, then also Estupiñán is a good option at left back for Brighton. I think he's played 90 in the last 3. And he's been like an FPL favourite across the last couple of years in terms of getting goals, getting assists, like crops up in the 93rd minute with like a winner for Brighton. So he's, had multiple double-digit hauls as a defender, and having that potential at only like 5 million is absolutely fantastic. It's just a case of whether he retains that place or Lamptey or whoever else comes in. I did see that their Turkish wing back plays winger, plays centre mid, plays everywhere. Kadioglu, he got injured and he's expected to be out for a few weeks, if not a couple months. So Estupiñán might be a little bit more nailed. So that's kind of like why I like him. For Gabriel, we kind of mentioned it. I think you kind of have to go one or the other with Raya. I'm not super keen on a double up, but I am also semi-tempted by how, or everyone else seems to be not super keen on it. I kind of want to switch and be a little bit different. And I think there's points to be had there, because I think Arsenal will still be the best defense in the league. And now you couple that out of a tough fixture run into a good fixture run. It's kind of like the no-brainer of why overthink it. Just put 2 of the best defensive assets in the game in your team and you'll get points and not have to worry about rotation and not have to worry about transferring them out for like another team who has good fixtures coming up. So I think Gabriel is a good option. Konaté's been an interesting one because I've kind of avoided him, but ever since Game Week 2, he's looked absolutely fantastic since Quansah got dropped, and it's been quite an interesting one to see Liverpool look so strong defensively, and I think a lot of people jumping off Trent. I just don't think there's value there for 7 million, but you can get into that Liverpool defence for 5.3 million, especially given that I think that they've had the most clean sheets. I think Van Dijk's got the highest scoring points for a defender, but Konaté's also scored. He's got an assist. He's kind of there or thereabouts, but for 5.3 into what is the best defence in the league at the minute, I think that's a really good option. I know we talked about Chelsea and you're not super keen on them, but Colwell is an option if you want to go into there. Mazraoui as well for United. We'll probably have a discussion about their fixtures when it comes to the likes of Bruno and Garnacho. But I just don't know that there's so much uncertainty around Amorim coming in, like the new manager, and how he's going to play. Is he going to play his 3-4-3? And then in that case, is Mazraoui? I think I've heard a lot of Man United fans speak. Obviously, a lot of them talk a lot of nonsense, but a lot of them do have some ball knowledge. But Mazraoui apparently is better at like inverting in rather than being like a typical wing back. So people are expecting either like Malacia and Dalot to be the wing backs, and then Mazraoui either play one of the back 3 or be dropped. So I think there's a lot of question marks around United. And I think it's kind of, for me, I wouldn't be touching their defensive assets unless it's Dalot.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about Dalot, and people think he could be a guy who plays down the wing more than people expect in that new system. But as you said, we kind of have to wait and see how they play. But I'm with you for sure on Dalot. He's a player who's really interested me because I've seen a lot of conversation about if he does play that wingback position, then you get a lot more offensive threat from him than you would have seen previously, and it could pay a lot of dividends at his current price.
Exactly. You're basically getting a winger for 5 mil who's, got, and I think United will be better defensively generally in that formation or under a new manager. Also has the ability to score goals and get assists. But also the good thing with Dalot over the years is he is just a magnet for bonus points. You'll see him not even be involved in a game where United win 1-0 and then suddenly he's on like 9 points. And you're like, where did that come from? And it's just great to own him. And at 5.1, he's not like super overpriced, especially if people are dropping Håland. You've got a lot of money to spend. You may as well spend it. And I think they've got really good fixtures coming up. I was slightly annoyed. Wasn't annoyed because I have him. I was just annoyed for the owners that he was subbed off on the 57th or 58th minute and meant that he missed their clean sheet, because I think he might have been on bonus points as well. And I think that's just a one-off with Ruud managing the team, and I don't see that happening again. So definitely one to consider for our wildcard. The only other one, which, and we'll come to it later on, is I think a lot of people are overlooking Aston Villa. I know they haven't kept a clean sheet all season, but Digne has just so much creative threat, and we can talk about it in a little bit. But I just think for his value at 4.7, Aston Villa have really good fixtures coming up. I think he's great creatively wise to bring in, and for me, just a good option for at sort of below the 5 million mark.
Yeah, no, I like a lot of what you said. When you talk about Konaté, 5th highest scorer in FPL right now, right behind Trent, actually. Yeah, 5th high, well, at defense, right? Obviously not overall, but at defense, he's right behind Trent. Trent has 47, Konaté has 46. So, and you're saving, as you mentioned, 1.7 mil to have Konaté in the team while Trent's hurt. Yep. Verge is a little bit higher than that, but it's literally Verge, Gavardio, Aina from Forest, who is being transferred a lot, which is concerning considering they have to play Arsenal and City in the next 3. So I'm not really sure how that's going to work out for them, but maybe it will. I'm with you on Gabriel. He's probably going to be, and Nouri, Hall, they're probably all going to be in there, and you'll see them in a lot of popular teams. Konaté is the one that I need to decide on him, because he's probably going to go up in price to 5.4 in the next week or so. And then it's, how do you want to make it work? Because I think if you already are putting in Gabriel, you're expected to put in, one of, if not 2 of Saka, Palmer, Salah potentially. And then if for some reason, it won't be me, but if for some reason you're looking at Håland, then good luck making that work. And so you have to find some of these budget defenders, and Konaté's in that weird spot where he's not 4.5, he's not 4.0, he's in that 5 range and can be a little bit expensive to make it work, especially when we're talking about putting a player like David Raya in your team. But I like him a lot. And I think Digne is a really good guy to bring up, because I was looking at his stats just now, and he's like 2.7 goal involvements on the season, which is crazy for a defender. That's very, very high compared to what we've seen from other guys. You didn't bring up Robinson for Fulham. I still think Fulham's got a good run of fixtures. I still think he's a player that if you have him, I would consider keeping him in the team, but they do have a poor run for a little bit, so you're going to have to kind of weather the storm there, and people will probably be transferring him out. But you didn't bring up any City assets. No discussion about City. They have a couple bad games, but they never keep a clean sheet. Would you consider keeping them in the team or putting them in the team? They have Spurs at home, they have Liverpool away, but then they have Forest, Palace, United, Villa away, Everton, Leicester, West Ham, Brentford. It's not terrible. They have to get through these next 2 weeks, but I don't think anyone's expecting them to keep a clean sheet anyways.
Yeah, I just for me, City are just you can feel that you're smiling. That is me checking Twitter every week before trying to get news on Rico Lewis if he's starting, for only to get a 1 point. So that's just a lot of frustration coming out. I think with City not being able to keep a clean sheet, not necessarily great fixtures, with what seems like ever more present rotation from Pep of Walker starting, Lewis starting, Ake's back, then injured, Akanji, it's kind of like Ruben Diaz, Stones. I just don't want to go anywhere near it. The only one I would consider is Gvardiol, but I think for 6 million, he's just not worth it, especially with the fixtures and their inability to keep a clean sheet. So I just think City are kind of at a point, and the international breaks probably come for a good point, and I do think people will start to overlook them. And I think they'll come back strong. I just don't want any of the defenders. It's hard to know whether De Bruyne's going to come back and be instantly firing, or whether he's going to be fit enough. Foden, I can't wait to get out of my team. Håland, for me, I'm not on wildcard, so I'm going to keep him. And I think that's quite a good differential for a lot of people seem to be dropping him, the majority of FPL. But I do think if you're on Wildcard, dropping Håland is the best option because there's so much value elsewhere. If you have the ability to make the transfers, it's probably a good option. And talking about that value, I guess the midfield ones, it kind of speaks for itself. This, like you said, Saka, Salah, Palmer, Bruno, we've spoken about. But there's a couple others which I'm seeing in a lot of teams, and I really like Bournemouth's fixtures and Semenyo. For me personally, I just think I don't know whether I love Semenyo as a pick for around the 6 million mark. I think there's a lot of value if you think that they play well. I know a lot of people have been on Semenyo in his earlier fixtures, but he kind of dropped off over the last few. I think he's the sort of player that turns up in the easy fixtures. And Bournemouth kind of struggle against the bigger teams. So, it might be one to consider. Obviously, Mbeumo, a lot of people are dropping him, but I just think penalty taker for Brentford, they're playing well attacking-wise. Him and Wissa are linking up pretty well. I think if you've already got him and he's gone from 7 million to 7.9 and you're somewhere in amongst the 7.4, 7.5, it's kind of a personal thing. I think I've got so much value locked up in him, it seems like a shame to lose him. But equally, you could just jump onto another asset and just take the money while people are dropping him. So, and Boma's kind of a personal one, player to player. Bruno, I think, is fantastic value, and we said it last week. The issue is for me is like people are going to be chasing that 17 points. And I think Ipswich away is a good fixture, but after that one and the next one after that, I think Everton at home, they've got a little bit more tough fixtures. And I think
Arsenal away, Forest at home, and then City away.
Yeah,
but that's it. And then it's not so bad.
Then it's good till the end of time, right? That's as you said before.
Yeah, they have Liverpool in game week 20, but outside of that, then they don't have Spurs till game week 25. It's Bruno's a player that, and we'll talk about it when we get to your chart. He's not quite Palmer. He's not quite Salah, like by any stretch. But if he went on a run, even in some bad fixtures, I wouldn't be surprised either. I just wouldn't, because he's heavily involved in his team, and we see them playing better. And at what he's 8.4, I believe now after the price rise, and that's tremendous value to me when you're talking about taking a Palmer, taking a Saka, who are way up in the 10s, and he can contribute very similarly. And for his team, does all the same things. He's on the spot kicks. He's on pens. He can do similar stuff, just not quite as talented overall because he's a bit older, but still can do plenty of great things for United. And if they do play well, which I think we're kind of expecting at this point, that's where when you talk about Garnacho, you have Bowen on here. I'd love to talk about Bowen. And Mbeumo, the issue for him, for me, is really just the next 2 weeks are good. And then after that, it gets tough. Yeah. And especially the way they're playing right now. And I think there is concerns about Wissa. And I part of me does want to say if he gets up to 8 mil, and we have him at 7 right now, I'd consider just selling him and pivoting to a Wissa, because he's the one who's now scoring all the goals, right? Creating all the chances. And so I understand that from a lot of people, because before when it was just him, he was scoring and doing everything. Now it seems like he's kind of taking a bit of a back seat, especially in the goal scoring aspect of things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're right on all of those aspects. And I think the only thing worth mentioning on Bruno is, with the new manager, we don't know where he's going to. Same with similar question to Mazraoui and Dallo. Where does he slot in? Is he one of the midfielders? If he's one of the inside forwards, I think it is ridiculous value to have a Bruno who's going to be that attacking on spot kicks, like you say. He's on free kicks. He's on, everything runs through him. You can see that from the last game, to a goal and 2 assists, if you want to call it that. I just think and with the new manager boost, I think he will be the focal point for that team and the engine and everything else that comes with it. So I think for me, it's on Bruno, it's a wait and see. But if I was on Wildcard, I'd probably bring him in, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Okay, so talk to me about Bowen now, because I was not expecting to see Jarrett Bowen on here. So what is your theory behind having Bowen as a potential wildcard midfielder?
I just think if you want to go against the template and you want to be a little bit different, I think West Ham are going to start to play a little bit better football. They got some better fixtures coming up. Bowen's going to be on spot kicks, and he's also going to be the main outlet for them. So I just think he's kind of been overlooked for the whole season, has got goals, has got involved. I just think he's quite a nice other option to think about if you want a little bit more variety in your team. That's kind of why I included him in there.
Yeah, and if you want like some more context, and another thing that you could do, we talked about Bruno, we talked about Mbeumo as well. The next couple of weeks for these guys are very good, but for Bowen, they're not. Game week 12, game week 13, Newcastle away, which is going to be very tough. and then Arsenal at home, which is going to be very tough. But then they have Leicester away, home, Wolves at home, Bournemouth away, Brighton at home, Southampton away. So a solid 5 game weeks in a row of Bowen having pretty good fixtures. Now, then he has Liverpool and City, which are going to be tough. But if you're trying to mix and match on your team, you could bring him in, have him on the team, depending on whether it works for your team or not, and then mix and match. So you don't have to worry about, when do I play this guy? When do I sell Mbeumo? When do I sell Bruno? You could just make the fixtures work and mix and match your team, and it could work out fine because these types of players do match up well in their fixture swings as it stands right now.
Yeah, and as you said, it actually got me thinking there of you saying Mbeumo's next 2 are great, and then it's a bit shit. And then Bowen's first 2 are a bit shit, but then it's great. It's kind of like, is Bowen the outlet from Mbeumo at that price point for me? And I think it might be in a couple of game weeks' time. So definitely one to monitor. If you're on Wildcard, you could maybe bring him in early. But I do think Newcastle away and Arsenal home are probably 2 tough fixtures. I mean, you can see him getting a goal. He tends to do well against Newcastle. He tends to do well in another one of the North London derbies. So I think... Well, actually, West Ham's East, isn't it? I don't know. My London
you tell me, bro.
And yours is definitely not good enough. But yeah, I think that's kind of where my head's at with Bowen. I think he's definitely one to monitor. And I think for game week 13 onwards, I'm liking the look of him. On the forwards, I think I have not seen many wild cards that look different on the forward perspective. And we touched on it earlier. And I know you're thinking the same. Everyone has Isak, Cunha, and then one of Joao Pedro and Welbeck. And I understand its template for a reason, because it is probably the best avenue in terms of fixtures, who's performing well. They're all in really good form. So I think they're all good from that perspective. I think Isak is one for our team that I absolutely love to get involved now. I think he's got form, he's getting assists, he's involved in a lot of Newcastle goals, and Newcastle playing a lot better. Put good fixtures into the mix there, and I think he's one you can't overlook. Watkins, because I think he hasn't been playing particularly well, but I just love Villa's fixtures. And obviously they've got Champions League again, a lot of other questions, but I think he's still getting a lot of good chances. And I just think he's a good option. If you've still got loads of money from selling Håland, you can go with like an Isak or Watkins or Havertz around that price point. And I kind of prefer Watkins and Havertz over the likes of Jackson. So it's kind of why I included him. Cunha, we talked about, he's just in great form. Wolves fixtures. I don't quite like him as much at the price point he is, because he's just slightly more than Wissa and Joao Pedro and Welbeck and Raul. But he's obviously fantastic. And if you've got the money, I don't see why you wouldn't involve him. Like, he's scoring goals from outside the box. He's involved in the play. Very good technically. I love the look of him. For me, it's Joao Pedro over Welbeck. The issue is I owned Joao Pedro earlier in the season, and I don't want to go back down that avenue of one-pointers and getting injured, then international break, then, he's fit, and then he doesn't play. And I've just got PTSD from the whole Joao Pedro thing. So I think I'm going to wait and see. Obviously, he got 11 points, but he came on for 30 minutes. Is it likely he'll start the next game? Probably. But would you rather just go with Welbeck, who's consistently played at striker, scoring goals? It's kind of like, do you want to go for the Maverick with the high risk, high reward? It's like, I see it like the ceiling of Joao Pedro is probably here, but the floor's here. And Welbeck's probably like somewhere in the middle. It's like, are you going to take the risk, or do you want to go with what's safe? I don't know. What do you think? What do you go with out of Welbeck and Joao Pedro?
See, it's tough, because I think the way that I understand the FPL community right now makes me want to take Joao Pedro. And honestly, like, in the City game, he changed the game for them completely. Like, he came on, scored a goal quick, and it was kind of a lucky goal. It was right place, right time. Those things happen. You got to still be good and be in the right position to score. But then the pass that he made to assist the final goal to win them the game was unbelievable. And so I think the problem is that people who are trying to decide, they're going to look to see what happened last game. And like you just said, came on for 30 minutes, sure, but he got a goal and assist in 30 minutes. And then you look in 2 weeks off after coming back from being injured, he should be fully fit, ready to play, and starting. He'll start next to Welbeck, and I'm sure both of them will play well. And I believe he's also a cheaper price. So I think when you look at it from that perspective, over the last couple weeks, having Pedro get that goal and assist the last week on the bonus points, all of that will sway people slightly in his favor. Welbeck's been good as well, but I think that people will prefer Pedro because he's a little bit cheaper. But honestly, you have to have probably one of two in your team when you're wildcarding. And I think the answer may be Pedro, even though as it stands right now, we do have Welbeck in our team because he's the one who's projected to rise right now. But Pedro could be the guy when it all comes down to it that, as you said, maybe has a slightly higher ceiling, and we should be willing to take the risk on it, even though he's been injured. He's let us down a little bit, but he could be the guy that really does score more points.
He could be the guy indeed. The only other thing I wanted to talk about was, and I can go onto it if I can find where I'm presenting this here. Well, I guess first, actually, there's two things. The first one is, as you can see here, it's kind of someone gathered the data from the top content creators, and you'll see a lot of the players we just talked about. It's basically merged them all into one. And I think we've covered all of these players kind of, but you can start to see that this is just a very template team. And I think there's two things. I think you put it nicely earlier in terms of, it's template. So try and find differences where you see players here that you don't think are going to do well, replace them with ones that you think are going to do well, and you're going to get a jump on the people who are going with the template. And equally, a lot of people still don't have their wildcards. So you're already getting an advantage over all of them. So maybe don't change too much, but just one or two pockets of what you think is different to this team on page. Obviously, that team on the page, it looks fantastic in terms of fixtures and everything, but everyone probably has a little bit different in terms of their view on the matter.
Yeah, like you just look here, and we just talked about Welbeck versus Pedro, and if Joao Pedro is the popular pick and you want to be different because you feel like you're a little bit behind, you need to score more points to catch up, Welbeck could be the answer, because if he's the one scoring the goals and score more points, he could be enough of a differential, even though I believe as it currently stands, he's 21% selected by managers, and Pedro is only at like 6 or 7% because he hasn't been playing. And I think with this game week could be up in, at least double digits, potentially even higher than that. But a lot of the guys we have talked about, whether it's Gabriel, Konaté, Nouri, Hall, it's really just Semenyo, who I'm personally not sold on. I don't think he's going to be in my team, but it's a player, whether you go Semenyo or Rodgers, who is dealing with a bit of an injury right now as well, you have to have a cheaper option to counteract a Salah in your team. So I understand why people have something like that. But yeah, Cunha, Isak, Pedro, or Welbeck is going to be very popular, and I don't think I would stay away from that personally. It's finding ways to differential with the defense and maybe in the midfield, but Saka, Palmer, Salah, they're going to be popular, and you may just have to have them in your team because they're going to be so good every single week. But I don't know what it is about Salah, the fixtures and everything. Like, he just keeps scoring points, but I don't feel like he's playing that well. You think? It's tough for me, Tom. Like, I love Salah. He's a great player. But I sold him a few weeks ago because of the fixtures, and that was really stupid. And I feel like I'm making the same mistake again if I don't have him in my team, and that's the biggest problem. So I'll probably end up having him in the team when it's all said and done. I still have money to bring him in the team if I wanted to, but it's very interesting to talk about a player like Salah because he's been so good in FPL this year. I just still feel like Palmer is the better answer, and having Palmer, Saka, and Salah in a team is a little bit more difficult to make happen.
Yeah, no, completely agree with you. I think I've gone on the pick Salah, drop Salah, pick Salah, drop Salah. I think I've sold him twice. He's now back. He's been back in my team for a couple of weeks because I just can't stand watching Liverpool play, and he has a really shit game, and then he turns up and puts one in the corner in the last minute and gets 10 points. And I just don't think it's sustainable for them, especially with but they're still playing well attackingly. He's on penalties. For me, it's more just damage limitation or just personal thing of I'm just frustrated seeing Salah do well, so I'd rather just have him in my team for now. But I do think you're right. Palmer is a much better asset for me, from my perspective. You get 2 extra million, and then you can spend that elsewhere. If you don't think Salah's going to be as prolific as he has been, and by prolific I mean getting the odd goal here and there, I do think there is other value across the team. So I think you are right. The last thing that I wanted to talk about was this chart that I found really interesting on Twitter, right? Is down the left axis, you can kind of see is big chances created. So who's creating the big chances, and then who's getting the big chances across the x-axis at the bottom. So if you can see there in the very top left, these are the players that are creating the chances. You've got Son, Digne, Cunha, Foden. And interesting to see Cunha up there, but also interesting to see Digne. And I know we touched on him earlier. I think Digne is like a really good option, creative-wise, to see a defender right up there. with a clean sheet potential on top, I just think that data looks really fantastic. He's creating over 0.8 big chances a game, which just from a defender's perspective is absolutely fantastic. Son is up there for creativity, but that puts me off him at his price point. To see he's not getting the big chances, he's just creating them. He's getting 0.2, 0.3 big chances per game at 9.9 million or whatever. I think he is just one to stay away from, especially given Spurs fixtures.
Yeah.
Foden, I think the less we talk about him, the better. Just sell him. Like, he might start firing again and we can have a conversation down the line if he comes up with a hat-trick. I'll probably then retract that and put him straight back in, knee-jerk him back in. But for now, I just think City aren't quite clicking and I don't really want to talk about him anymore. Palmer, like you said earlier, is kind of in his own little space up there of he's getting 0.7 big chances a game, but he's creating almost one big chance a game. So for me, that goal involvement, you can kind of see like the curve of players who are starting to get like in the area of either being great for creativity, great for getting the chances, or kind of both. And the players on the peripheral, like Cunha, Palmer, Raul Jimenez is an interesting one being up there because for me personally, I was looking to maybe get rid of Raul Jimenez out of my team. I know he's only playing 70, 75 minutes, but if he's creating 0.7 big chances and also getting over one big chance a game himself, that's like almost 2 potential goal involvements from him every game. And you can see he's yellow because he's not converting them into points at the minute, but that could change, especially like you said earlier, Fulham's fixtures aren't necessarily super bad. I think if he can retain his place over Muniz, I think a lot of people will be at that price point still fantastic. And he's got Wolves at home at the next game, so I think if you've got Raul, stick with him and let's see. The data is really promising for him. And also like one that is in no wildcards. So maybe a good differential with data this good is fantastic. Like he's right next to Salah, who we're saying a 12.7 is essential, is absolutely ridiculous. You've got Bruno slightly to the left of them, who I think his data has been fantastic the whole season. He just hasn't converted it into points. And we saw last week what he is capable of doing. I think he's a great pick. Around there. And then you've kind of got in the middle like the Rodgers and Burmo, Adama, Luis Diaz. I just think they data-wise now is dropping off a little bit and you want to be looking more on the outside. So you've got Jota, who's got good data, but I don't know, I'd kind of stay away from. Watkins is still getting a lot of big chances per game, 1.5 big chances per game. It's kind of like why I like him with good fixtures. They're in the Champions League for a reason. Yeah, it's kind of like Isak, when he wasn't scoring and no one wanted him, it's like Watkins. He has the ability to, in the next game, I think they've got Crystal Palace at home maybe, and he scores 2. Everyone's going to be straight back onto Watkins, and they have the funds from doing it from selling Håland. So I just think, is it worth now getting ahead of the curve, getting Watkins in for good fixtures? He's getting really good data, good chances. I quite like that. And then the only other ones worth mentioning is Solanke's data is still pretty good for big chances, but I think Spurs as a Solanke owner yourself, I'll maybe let you touch on Solanke, but we've also got Wissa down there with really good data, and he might be the option to go with if you want to sell Burmo and save a lot of money. Håland obviously an alien just out to the right there in terms of big chances, so I think it's gonna. I still think Haaland's probably worth selling on Wildcard, but if you have him, a good differential, like calling Haaland's differential is mad, but with that many good chances per game, I don't think he's worth the money. But if you have him, good to captain. So that's kind of like, there's still pockets of players in and around there. Like Havertz's data isn't fantastic, but I still think he's a good option. Is there anyone else which jumps out to you out of those, or are you kind of agreeing with the data for who we should be looking at?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, you look at City, right? And it's clear that they just aren't the same team without De Bruyne. And so we have to kind of see when he's back, if he's back, what it kind of looks like. He played a bit this past game when they were losing. Wasn't able to do enough to kind of get them back level. But maybe if he plays 65, 70, even a full 90, then those chances will come back and they'll start converting. It's funny you brought up Son and Solanke. This graph exactly shows what happens. Son runs down the line, he gets the ball to Solanke, and he doesn't convert in the chance. Because that's what it's been all season long. That's why it's been so frustrating to own him, because he has this game, 2 goals and an assist. Wow. Look at this guy. He's back. Next game against Ipswich, blanks. It's like,
He's not
how is this even possible? But you look at his goal involvements, 5.5 expected goals, Tom. 5.5. That's like one of the highest in the Premier League right now. It's insane how many chances he gets, and he doesn't do anything with them. So it's just funny to see this chart, and it really identifies what's going on the team. And when you watch them play, it's clear to see what's going on. You talk about Solanke versus Son. I'm kind of with you. I'm out on both, mainly because of fixtures, but also because of the way they're playing. Garnacho being there, especially in big chances himself, is interesting, because you look at the last game, he should have had at least a couple shots on target that he just straight missed, and great opportunities for him. And at his price point's really good. But I do want to ask you about the forwards, right? Because you brought up a lot of different forwards. You brought up Wisa. You brought up Solanke. We're not going to talk about Chris Wood because you hate him. You brought up Watkins. I always talk about Nick Jackson because I think that him and Palmer in a team is very interesting because they link up a lot. Yeah. But you said it, and we said this off the top. Everyone on their team has Welbeck, Isak, Cunha, Pedro. So who of those players would you drop or consider as a differential for the Watkinses, for the Wisas, for the Rauls, who you like, but do you like them more than the options we brought up in Wildcard with Welbeck, Isak, Cunha, and Pedro?
Yeah, part of me is thinking that a lot of the community right now is just kind of jumping on a bandwagon, like putting Cunha in. Have they watched Wolves? Have you watched Wolves play? Do they even know who Cunha is and what sort of player is? Or are you just following what people are putting out on Twitter? For me personally, sure. I don't think a lot of people know how these teams play, who they are, who the players, are performing, and they're just watching like a YouTube video. I mean, hopefully if you're watching this, fair enough. Thanks for watching. But you know what I mean? Like, don't take my advice as, 100%. I just don't think a Cunha, a Welbeck are game-breaking players like a Saka, Palmer, Salah, Håland, even like an Isak, who I think is a killer in front of goal. Like, his finishing's unbelievable. He's playing in an attacking team. I just don't see the likes of Cunha being as prolific, or Raul being as prolific, or Wissa, who I think historically hasn't been as prolific, and he's stringing goals together now. But I just don't see that being maintained. And I think it's the same with Joao Pedro and Welbeck. As an owner of Joao Pedro earlier in the season, I think his ceiling is really high, but you'll see a lot of his goals aren't super well-worked goals. They're kind of like scrambles in the box and then tapping it in. It's like, if he doesn't have the ability to score the goals that aren't like that, when they're not getting the lucky breaks, is he just going to score 2 points or get an assist here or there? And that's kind of like why I'd be semi-tempted to maybe look at bringing in like a Watkins who's playing 90 minutes and is a good finisher, or an Isak who's playing 90 minutes as a good finisher. Right now these players are in form, doing well, have the fixtures, but is that just a very small sample size? And that's kind of like why I think don't just follow the template if you don't know who these players are, if they're doing well, that kind of thing. So that's kind of where my head's at with it.
Yeah, for sure. Because a player like Watkins, I mean, he's 9 million, and I think that would limit you if you do want to have a Saka, a Palmer, a Salah. Like, you can't really have all those players and Watkins unless you're going really cheap at keeper and defense. But to your point, yeah, sure, he has to play Chelsea. Going to be a tough game. He's got to play City. Going to be a tough game. Newcastle away. Going to be a tough game. But like, he can still score in all of these games, and he's more than capable of doing that, whether it's creating chances himself or scoring goals on his own. So you look at that, it's just so funny to look at this chart and see Raul there, and you're like, man, why is Raul not on my team? Well, it's because he's a forward. He's a cheap forward, but he's not one that necessarily inspires you that you need to have in the team. But it's very hard to ignore the data to see a player who you don't necessarily believe in, but he's the only guy amongst Palmer, Saka, like all these talented players, right there with Salah, who is literally playing as the best player in FPL right now. So it's kind of crazy to see something like that. And he was not considered. You don't hear him talked about that much. He was been talked about for a few weeks now as an option when Fulham had good fixtures, but now Fulham has bad fixtures, and people are like, he's got to go. Right? It's very interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and I think the second he scores again, I think he'll score against Wolves. And then people are back on the Raul train. It's kind of like, why not be a bit different and go away with it? I do think it is person to person. I've still got him in my team, but like, it was funny because I was looking at moving him out, and then I saw this and I was like, oh shit, his data is really good. And if you watch him play, like, he is great creatively well. He got an assist. Obviously, Smith Rowe's goal was warranted a lot more than the assist Jimenez provided for it.
Yeah.
But, I still think a really good option. And I think if he they'd be silly to bench him for Muniz. It's just a case of like he's a 70-minute player, but in the 70 minutes he's getting, he still has this data, and he tends to, like, if he does score, he tends to stay on for the full 90. So then you're getting even better chances. So I think that's kind of a nice wrap up on this. But maybe we have a little look at our team and see how it's doing.
Yeah, so this is the team that we put together a few days ago. Obviously, we still have a lot to figure out. I believe we still have $3.5 million to work with. Probably still a few transfers. This is mostly playing with price rises and watching the trends in the FPL community. But as you see, Welbeck, Isak, Cunha up top. Maybe we'll change it to Pedro. Maybe we'll change it to Raul, because we do need to make up some points in the team. Saka, Mbeumo, Palmer, Iwobi, who is interesting because he was on the top left side of that chart, still been creating a lot of goals. Tougher fixtures for Fulham, but he's been very involved and very interesting. He's another player that we're just watching for the price rise, and I believe he did rise from 5.5 to 5.6, so we already got that. Bruno rose as well. 8 Nouri, Hall, Konaté, Ashley Young, and then Gabriel in defense. So again, watching price rises mostly, but when we talk about Nouri, Hall, potentially Konaté, Gabriel, who we already had, is at 6.1 now, probably going to stay in the team. And then figuring out what we want to do at goalkeeper. The only player who's not in the team, who probably will be when it's all said and done, we'll have to wait and see kind of how the team looks, is Salah. Salah's probably a player I want to bring into the team, just because we already talked about it. He's been so good, so difficult to keep out of the team. If you're wildcarding, he would probably be where I'd start, with him and Palmer. Saka, if you could make it work, but I think that Salah and Palmer, even with how widely owned they are and selected they are, you want to have them in the team. But is there anyone else that you see that maybe we could talk about? Obviously, you see the team now that may change from this week on to next week when we finally finalize the wildcard team and solidify it for Game Week 12.
Yeah, I think the things that immediately jump out is probably having someone different than Flecken. So probably a Raya, probably Raya or Verbruggen that we talked about. And I think that solves a lot of issues straight away. I think defense-wise, I like the look of it so far. I'm maybe not so set on Ashley Young, but I know we're trying to get, maybe some double price rises here. I do think that
another one with the fixtures.
I'd be looking at
fixtures for a bit, but then they swing.
Exactly, yeah, and I think we spoke about Digne and his creativity. I'd probably be looking to bring him instead of Young. In the midfield, I like all of it, other than maybe Mbeumo's maybe a chance for us to jump off and do something different. Iwobi I like, but I just don't think he's going to be a game breaker for us. I think he's a good enabler at 5.5, but we've still got 3.5 million in the bank. So I think for us, it's a case of, and I do still think there's value to be had. There's people, going with really big at the back, and we could maybe ditch Gabriel and have 4 decent 4.5 million players defending.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And with Raya in goal, it gives us more money to spend. So that's when we're looking at maybe, instead of Saka, we bring in Salah, or instead of Cunha, we go for Watkins, for instance. So I think that's kind of what the things. I think this is a really good structure for what we've got so far. I think it's a case of like just now monitoring and refining and seeing if there's anyone that really jumps out. I do think you're right. The only players that it seems like an omission is Salah, and then it's just whether we want to be a bit different here and there.
Yeah, and that's where when we initially talked about this team, it wasn't to finalize it, right? We did have a couple of price rises we were monitoring, and we did take advantage of some of those. Isak is one that we're still expecting to come, but we had so many players that we just didn't need in the team. And so there was a lot of players we're going to drop. Rico Lewis was one who I believe already did drop in price and probably will still continue to drop because of the way that not only he's been looking, but City's been looking as well. But yeah, you look at Mbeumo, and for anyone who hasn't seen this, I saw this on FPL Twitter the other day, but you can see like what their current price is versus what you paid for them, right? And so like Mbeumo is a perfect example. We bought him for 7 mil and he's up at 7.9, so we could sell him for 7.4 and get a good return on him. And that's the only reason why I brought that up as a potential option for us if we did want to be different, because we do have some points to make up. But I really like the structure of this team. You look at the forwards, we talked about them incessantly, and what do you know? These are the guys that we decided on. The midfield, we talked about those options as well, and we'll kind of monitor it throughout the week. But I think this is a pretty good start outside of not having Salah and then figuring out what we're going to do at goalkeeper, because we don't really want to have Flecken in the team right now, especially with their fixtures. But outside of that, I think you're looking at a pretty good foundation, and we obviously brought up the most popular one. So we do have to find some ways to be a little bit different. We have to find a way to be a little bit different. That way we're not just copying what everyone else is doing, Tom. and we're scoring some points and adding some real value to our pod listeners overall.
And having some fun. That's what it's all about at the end of the day, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. But thank you to everybody for tuning in. Tom, do you have any final thoughts for the people? I know that you're headed out for a couple of days, so enjoy your vacation. But thank you for spending some time with me, giving me all your thoughts on what we should do with the team, because I thought you provided tons of valuable insight as to wildcard options, players we're talking about, targeting, fixture swings, and a lot of things that are going into this game week, because 2 weeks off gives us a lot of time to think and analyze our teams. And ultimately, you provided a ton of great information to the people. So thank you, my friend.
Well, I'm not sure how insightful it was, but it's always a pleasure chatting to you. You know I love this time every week, so lovely to be with you. Lovely. Thank you to everyone who watched this, and yeah, thank you. Instead of Gabriel,
or we don't go Raya.
Or Raya goes to the Brighton keeper for Bruno,
yeah.
Which I then kind of like that for picking. You know, we've got 5 playing defenders, but really you've got 4 really good ones. Gabriel, Digne, Håland, Nouri. We pick from those 3 every week. O'Shea's kind of there if we've got 2 really bad fixtures or something. And then your midfield is Saka, Palmer, Salah, Fernandes, which is ridiculous. Yeah. And Fernandes could become Bowen if we want. And then you've got Joao, Pedro, Isak, Cunha. It's not bad, but I was just thinking how do we got, if we want to get Salah in, it's kind of like that.
That midfield is insane.
Yeah.
so good. Oh, it's so good. And to keep Gabriel is ridiculous.